Hi, I'm Vince Slough at Cornell University. In this video, I want to show you how to calculate the consistency score for nursing homes or other long-term care settings. Consistent assignment is a pillar of quality of care with many benefits for staff and residents. And I want to show you how to measure consistency using a simple Excel spreadsheet. First, I'll mention that the method that I'm sharing today is a quick, bare bones, do it yourself method that hopefully you can do in a matter of minutes. If you're interested in something more in depth, you might be able to find some tools online. This is the consistent assignment tracking tool from the Advancing Excellence campaign from a few years ago that even though the Advancing Excellence campaign isn't active as it was, it you can still search for this and find this online. There was a quality improvement organization in Colorado that put out this spreadsheet that has many tabs and ultimately answers a variety of statistical questions. The one thing uh, that we share in common here is with what I'm doing is that we're focusing on the number of different caregivers per resident over the course of, let's say, 1 month. We're measuring consistency as the number of different CNAs or all nursing staff who would interact with a group of residents in 1 month. We want to keep track of that and make sure that it is not unnecessarily large. To start, all that we need is our schedule data for 1 month. Maybe you can get this as exported from a digital system that you're using, or maybe you'll find it worthwhile to have someone go through and take an hour or two to type these up manually. This is fake schedule data for a nursing home, let's say in Hollywood, as I've used I used the list of Academy Award nominees and winners for my CNAs and nurses in the facility. You could see that there were a little over 2,000 shifts worked in this nursing home in a month. I have the date that the shift was worked, the shift, whether day, evening, or night. This isn't necessary unless you would be interested in breaking this out to find the consistency by day shift, evening shift, or night shift. The name of the worker. We'll mention in a minute what to do if there are some typos. The unit in which that person worked, and the role. It doesn't matter who was scheduled to work where, any changes that were made due to absences. All this is a list of people who actually work shifts in units in a specific unit in on a specific day in March. Once you have all of your data in this table, the first thing you want to do is to turn this data, which is just text entered in cells or date values entered in cells, you want to turn it into a table. We're going to go to the Insert tab and click Table. It will find the selection of cells that has the data that we need, and we should leave it checked that My Table is headers because this top row here has has the name of each of the columns. Click OK. If you wanted to, you can sort by unit or sort by role or filter by role if you wanted to see it, but we don't need to do any of that right now. Let's just go to the Design tab and click Summarize with Pivot Table. It will have our table selected. Maybe this will be Table 1 or Table 2 for you. Whatever this table is, it will automatically select that, so you shouldn't have to do anything, and we'll put it in a new worksheet, which will make a new tab down here. Click OK, and we have this new sheet created. For me, it's called Sheet 1. And the pivot table is a feature that, if you're not familiar with it, allows you to drag and drop different pieces of data to get statistics that can be useful for us. If you're intimidated by pivot tables, hopefully this video will make you feel a little bit more comfortable with them. The first thing we want to do is look at our entries here in the pivot table box. These are our 5 columns from the data that we had entered. Let's take name and drag it down to rows. Here, all of my workers are going to show up. And let's just take any of these. It actually doesn't matter. We just want to count of the number of times those names show up. So I'm going to drag it here. It should say count of. If it doesn't say count of, go click on this down arrow. Click on this down arrow, value field settings, and choose count. So just counting the number of times each of our nursing staff show up in our data set. We can go through and look at all the names. One thing to do is to make sure that there aren't duplicates. There are a couple ways that you might find duplicates. Here we see Anthony Hopkins shows up twice. It's not clear why it's a duplicate. We'll come back to this in a moment. Looks like 22 times shows up as Anthony Hopkins, but one time there's some difference. We'll check that out. We can scroll down and see any other issues that might come up. Here I see another issue where Meryl Streep is misspelled twice. So I want to show you how we can go back to original data and fix that. Go back to your original data set. Click on the little drop-down triangle by name. Let's go look at Meryl Streep first. I'm going to click the box that says select all, so now we have none selected. We'll go down to Meryl Streep. Let's select the 2, just click on the 2 that are misspelled. And I'm going to just manually change them. We're just going to type over, click OK. I'll just type over where they are incorrect and change them. So now when I go down and look at Meryl Streep, there's only one. Only the correct version of Meryl Streep shows up in this data set. The other problem I had was Anthony Hopkins. And what's interesting here is even though there were 2 names appearing in the data set in the pivot table, there's only one here. So let's select that and see what's happening. I'm going to get all of my entries with Anthony Hopkins, and this is a problem I've encountered many times when I've worked with undergraduates to manually transcribe the data. But let's look at Anthony Hopkins, and I can see when I click through this, what's actually happening here is that there's an extra space after the S in Hopkins. That is, it shows up as 2 different names than in the pivot table. Let's delete that extra space. And now when I go back, I'll go to my pivot table. I'm going to go back to Analyze. Let's click Refresh. All right, now I only have 1 Meryl Streep and 1 Anthony Hopkins. So my data set has been cleaned of any of these typos with names, which is an important part of the process. If you had a digital scheduling system, hopefully you didn't have that problem, but if you have someone entering data by hand, you might have that problem. Now for the fun part, we're going to, let's drag unit down to the columns area. And now we have it divided out. How many times did each of our CNAs work in each of these units? And actually, it's the CNA and nursing staff. So let's look at only CNAs. Let's calculate our consistency of care for CNAs. We can drag the roll column to filters, and let's just look at CNAs. So we have this selected. If you have to select multiple items, you can select this select multiple items box down here at the bottom. Let's just, if we're only going to choose one, we don't need to worry about that. We'll just choose CNAs. So now we're down to 70 something workers, it looks like. So we have 70 something CNAs working in our facility who worked in units 1 through unit 7. You can see the number of times each CNA worked. And what we want to do is figure out how many times each of these CNAs worked in different units. And say that another way, we want to figure out how many different CNAs worked in each one of our units to get a consistency score for all of our units. To do that, let's click on the row labels box in the top left of the pivot table. I'm going to click and hold down to select my entire table from that row down. So row labels all the way down, and we'll get the grand total as well. I'm going to copy that. You can Control C or Command C. There's also the little copy button under the Home tab. So we're going to copy. Let's go to the plus sign to make a new sheet. I'm going to go to paste, and I'm going to paste the values here. So go down and to this clipboard where it says 1, 2, 3 all the way on the left. We're just going to paste the values. You can resize column A so we can see all the names. And we're going to calculate some statistics now based on this table. I'll make this a little bit easier to see. And we want to calculate two statistics. I'm going to go to grand total. Beneath grand total, I'm going to type shifts per day and consistency score beneath that. Just type those into those cells. Shifts per day, we're going to just take this is going to be an average number of shifts worked per day, so we can get a sense of the relative staffing levels for each of our units. I'm going to use a formula here to do these calculations. So in this cell, for me, it's B80. I'm just going to type equal sign. I'm going to click on the grand total. I'm going to divide it, type the slash for division, divide it by, the number 31. So there were 31 days in March. So that was about 3 for unit 1. Units 2 through 6 are around 6, and unit 7 is around 9. And what I just did there was I wanted to calculate this for my other units, so I selected this little box in the bottom right hand corner where my cross-shaped cursor is, and I held down on that to drag that all the way over, and that allows me to calculate that same metric for all 7 of my units. So if I were to click over here in cell H80, it does cell H79 divided by 31. Just a way Excel can make things a little easier for you. For B81, I want to calculate my consistency score. I want to know how many different workers worked at least one shift in unit 1. To do that, I'm typing equal sign, count, left parenthesis, and then I'm going to select, starting in the row above grand total, I'm going to select by holding down my cursor and going up. I'm going to go all the way to the top to just beneath the header row. I'm going to type a right parenthesis to close that off. And it only took me 5 workers to fill all the shifts in unit 1. I'm going to drag that across using that little box in the bottom. I'm going to see now the consistency score for all of my different units. It took 18 different workers to fill those 200 shifts in Unit 2. I can see, and that looks like the maximum number was 18 for Units 2 and Unit 6. And if I wanted to report the consistency scores, this is what I would want. Excel thinks that I should have included the grand total, so you can just click and ignore that error if it bothers you. But once again, we're going from the row beneath the header row all the way down, and we're counting up the number of different CNAs, or we're having Excel do the work for us, counting the number of different CNAs who worked at least one shift in that unit in March. Let's add one more metric to help understand what's going on. I'm going to call that shifts per worker or shifts per CNA. How many shifts on average is a CNA working in that unit? So we had 90 shifts worked in Unit 1, spread over 5 workers. Okay, how many is that on average? So we're going to go to, for me it's cell B82. I'm going to go to this cell here. I'm going to click on the grand total number for column B. And then I'm going to use my up arrow to go from that cell to, or I could just type cell B81. Anyway, I want to divide 90 by 5. That means the average worker in Unit 1 is working 18 shifts in Unit 1. So there's probably a small core of full-time workers who are working in Unit 1. And if I look at my other units, I see that the consistency, or the shifts per worker in Units 2, which is this column C here, and Unit 6, which is column G, I can see that it looks like workers are only working an average of about 10 or 11 shifts in that unit per month. So it's either because they're part-time workers or because they're spreading their shifts out over different units in the facility that were lower than this 18 number or 21 and a half number that we're seeing in Unit 7. But the key metric is probably going to be your consistency score. Once again, this tells us the number of different CNAs over the course of the month who worked at least one shift in that unit. In a good case, we would hopefully be looking at around 10, 15 different CNAs caring for each of our group of residents. So these numbers look pretty good. What we would want to watch is that these numbers don't start creeping up to or exploding to 25, 30, or 35, because that could bring quality of care and staff morale issues into play. In my other video, I talk about some of the ways to bring these numbers down. Hopefully through this video, though, you're confident in measuring them and understanding how you could get these numbers from your scheduled data.